The summer sun baked the town of Red Creek that afternoon, turning the white stone of Thornton Bank and Trust into a shimmering beacon on Main Street. Inside, the scent of polished wood and ink filled the air, and 18-year-old Catherine Thornton adjusted her lace collar for the 10th time, trying to look busy while her heart fluttered from the heat. That was when the door swung open and the light dimmed. A man filled the doorway, broad-shouldered, sun-darkened, the kind of presence that made people stop what they were doing. The stranger had to duck under the frame just to enter. The soft creak of his boots on the marble floor echoed like distant thunder. Catherine froze. No one like him ever walked into her father's bank. The folks of Red Creek were ordinary men, tidy hats, pressed coats, polite smiles, but this man was extraordinary. He looked like he belonged to the open plains, to the wind and the wild. Not the polished world of numbers and ledgers afternoon, he said, his voice low and steady. Need to make a deposit. He dropped a leather pouch onto the counter. It landed with a heavy thud. Coins jingled inside. Catherine reached for it, but her hands shook. When she untied the cord, her eyes widened. Gold, more than she had ever seen in one place. That's quite a sum, Mr. Colton Eyes, he said. Simply sold my herd this week. She wrote the name carefully into the ledger, pretending not to notice the way he watched her. His gaze wasn't rude, not the way some men's were. It was steady, curious, almost protective. Catherine felt her cheeks warm. She tilted her chin up, remembering her mother's rule. Never let a man see you flustered. Your father lets you handle the accounts, he asked. Yes, she said quickly. He believes in proper education. Colton nodded once. That's good, but this world's rough. You look like someone who ought to be kept safe. The words shouldn't have touched her heart, yet they did. There was no mockery in them, only concern. Catherine finished the form and handed him the pen. It looked like a toy in his massive hand. When he passed it back, their fingers brushed. Just a moment, but it felt like the spark from a storm cloud. Catherine's breath caught. She dropped the pen, cold and bent to pick it up, folding down all that strength with surprising grace. When he straightened, he handed it back without a word. But there was something in his eyes, quiet recognition. He had felt it too. Just then the office door opened and Edmund Thornton, her father, strode in. A short, stout man whose waistcoat strained against his stomach. Good heavens, he muttered, staring up at Colton. You must be 7 feet tall, sir. Near enough, Colton said politely. Just opened an account, sir. Well, any man with gold is welcome here. Edmund's smile was professional, but wary. Catherine, why don't you let me finish this? Run along and help your mother with her preparations. Catherine hesitated. She wasn't finished, but her father's tone left no room for argument. She gathered her skirts and stepped away. As she did, she glanced back. Colton was watching her. He gave a small nod, not flirtation, but respect. The kind of respect her own father rarely gave. That night, from her bedroom window, Catherine watched the last traces of daylight fade over Main Street. She couldn't stop replaying that look. The silent nod of a stranger who had seen her not as a banker's daughter, not as property to be traded for social standing, but as a person. Her mother knocked and swept in, reminding her about the upcoming garden party, about which young men would attend. Proper suitors, she called them. Catherine nodded, but her mind was far away, back at the bank at a pair of gray steel eyes that had held her for one impossible heartbeat. 2 days later, Red Creek buzzed with gossip. Colton Hayes had bought the old Morrison Ranch, land that everyone thought would never be settled again, paid for it in cash. He wasn't just passing through, he was staying. Catherine's younger brother, Thomas, told her the news with the witty excitement of a boy who just met a legend. They say he drove that whole herd to market by himself. Didn't need a crew, just him and his horse. Catherine said nothing, but when she stepped to her window and looked east, she could see the outline of the ranch in the distance. A single curl of smoke rose from the chimney. She felt something she couldn't name. A week later, Catherine's father sent her into town for new ledgers. Inside the general store, she was comparing ink bottles when the light shifted behind her. Miss Thornton, that voice. She knew it instantly. She turned. Colton stood there, hat in hand. The bruises across his knuckles told stories of hard work. His smile, small and unsure, made her pulse quicken. "Mr. Hayes," she said, managing a polite tone, "how are you finding the Morrison Ranch?" "Got potential," he said. "Needs fixing. Roof leaks. Fences need mending." He paused, then looked straight at her. "Been meaning to thank you proper for helping me at the bank. Your father's efficient, but you made it feel less like business." She tilted her head. "Less like business, more like being seen," he said softly. Catherine's breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to her. She wanted to ask more, but before she could, her mother's voice rang across the store. "Catherine Thornton, what on earth are you doing?" Her mother appeared like a storm cloud, clutching her daughter's arm with the strength of scandalized propriety. "Come along now." Catherine turned back, but Colton only gave a small nod, the same silent respect as before. Before she was pulled away, that night, Catherine lay awake listening to the ticking clock and the soft hum of crickets outside. She knew she was supposed to forget him. Her father would never approve. Her mother would be horrified. But the image of that giant man, quiet and kind beneath his size, wouldn't leave her mind, and in her heart she knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. 3 long days passed before Catherine Thornton saw Colton Hayes again. She tried to bury herself in her lessons, embroidery, and piano practice, but her mind drifted back to the sound of his deep, quiet voice, and the way he looked at her like she was more than the banker's daughter. That afternoon, while helping her mother with garden flowers, she heard a commotion down the street. A wagon had broken down in front of the bank, its wheels shattered. The driver, an elderly man named Mr. Peterson, stood helplessly beside it while his wife sat crying on the wagon seat. Catherine, curious, stepped closer to the window and gasped. Colton Hayes was already there. He moved like a man who had done this 100 times, calm, steady, sure. Without hesitation, he bent down, wrapped his massive hands beneath the wagon's edge, and lifted. The crowd gasped as wood creaked and strained. The entire back end of the wagon rose off the ground as easily as if it were made of paper. "Hold steady," Mr. Peterson shouted, fumbling with a support beam. "Take your time," Colton said evenly. "I've got it." He did. He stood there for nearly a full minute, holding the wagon while Mr. Peterson worked. Sweat ran down his temples, glinting in the sunlight. When it was done, he set the wagon down with care, nodding as the old man thanked him with tears in his eyes. The crowd clapped softly, murmuring in awe, but Catherine couldn't move, her heart hammered. It wasn't just his strength. It was his kindness, the quiet way he helped without wanting praise. When his eyes lifted and met hers through the window, the noise of the street vanished. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, and in that single gesture, Catherine felt her world tilt. That evening, the Thornton household was alive with talk. Mr. Hayes' act of heroism had spread through town like wildfire. What sort of spectacle was that? Her father muttered over dinner. A man showing off brute strength in the middle of Main Street. Her mother frowned. Edmund, he was helping people. Maybe so. But that kind of man draws attention and trouble. Catherine set down her fork. He drew attention because he was kind. "Father, something this town could use more of." Her father's eyes hardened. "Mind your tone, young lady." Catherine fell silent, but inside something had begun to burn. Quiet defiance long suppressed. The next morning, she made a decision she could barely believe herself capable of. She packed a small basket with bread, cheese, and preserves, and told her mother she was visiting a neighbor. Then she slipped out the back door and started walking toward the Morrison ranch. The dirt road stretched long and empty under the hot sun. Her boots filled with dust. Her heart raced faster with every step. What if someone saw her? What if Colton misunderstood? What if she ruined her reputation completely? But she didn't stop. She couldn't. When the ranch finally came into view, she saw him on the roof, hammer in hand, shirt off in the heat. His back and shoulders moved like living sculpture, muscles flexing with each swing. The sight made Catherine's breath catch. She'd never seen anyone look so strong or so human. He must have heard her gasp because he turned. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither moved. Then carefully, Colton climbed down the ladder, wiped his brow, and reached for his shirt. "Miss Thornton," he said, voice calm but curious. "This is unexpected." Catherine held up the basket, her cheeks flushed. "I brought you food. You said the ranch needed work, and I figured you might not have time to cook." Quote, Colton blinked, then smiled just slightly. "That's mighty kind of you." She swallowed hard. "Would you like some company while you eat?" He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am, but only if you're sure. Folks in town might talk." "They already do," Catherine said softly. "Let them inside." The house was simple, wooden floors, sunlight streaming through cracked windows. Colton poured her coffee, careful not to crowd her, moving with the same slow, deliberate grace that had struck her at the bank. When their fingers brushed again, that same familiar spark leapt between them. "You're working too hard," she said quietly. "Your hands are blistered." "Can't afford to hire help," he replied, "and I'm used to doing things alone." "But you don't have to be alone," Catherine said, then froze. It was too bold, too revealing. Colton looked at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "Why did you really come here, Miss Thornton?" Catherine hesitated. She could lie, say she came out of charity, curiosity, but her heart wouldn't let her because "I can't stop thinking about you," she whispered. "I know I shouldn't, but I had to." "See you again." Colton's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the open field. "You know what people will say if they find out you were here." "I know, and you came anyway." "Yes. Why?" Catherine's voice trembled. "Because when you looked at me in that bank, you saw me. Not as a prize to be married off, but as a person." Colton stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. His voice dropped low. "You need to leave, Miss Thornton. Before this goes somewhere, it can't come back from." Catherine rose, too, her heart pounding. "And what if I don't want to come back from it?" He turned then, eyes burning with something raw, fear and longing all at once. "You don't know what you're asking," he said, his voice rough. "You're young. I'm not what your father wants for you." "You're everything I want," Catherine said, stepping closer. For a long, breathless moment, neither moved. Then, with a sigh that sounded like surrender, Colton reached out. His hand, enormous and rough, cupped her cheek with stunning tenderness. "If I touch you," he said softly, "there's no going back." "Then don't stop," she whispered, and when he kissed her, careful, hesitant, as if afraid to break her, Catherine felt her world change. There was no bank, no father, no town, just her and the man who had looked at her and seen something worth loving. When Catherine returned home that evening, her mother noticed her flushed cheeks but said nothing. The secret glowed like fire inside her chest. That night, she dreamed of the giant cowboy and the life she'd never imagined for herself. Wild, free, and full of impossible choices, because deep down she knew one thing for certain. Her father would never approve, and soon the whole town would know the truth. The morning air in Red Creek felt heavier than usual, thick with whispers and judgment. Word had spread faster than wildfire. Someone had seen Catherine Thornton walking back from the Morrison ranch alone. Her father hadn't spoken to her at breakfast. Her mother had only watched her with quiet, knowing eyes. By noon, Catherine stood behind the counter at Thornton Bank, pretending to balance the ledgers. Her hands trembled. She hadn't seen Colton Hayes since that stolen kiss. Maybe he'd decided to forget her. Maybe he'd realized what a disaster this could be. Then the bank's front doors swung open, and there he was. Colton had cleaned up, pressed white shirt, polished boots, hair combed back, but his sheer size still made the room feel smaller. He removed his hat and walked straight to her counter, his steps slow and deliberate. "Good morning, Miss Thornton," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "Mr. Hayes," Catherine replied, her voice steady though her heart thundered. "How can I help you today?" "Need to make a withdrawal," he said, sliding a slip of paper across the counter. Their fingers brushed again. The spark was still there, stronger now, charged with everything they couldn't say. Catherine leaned forward slightly. "My father's in his office," she whispered. "He can't see us from here." Colton nodded once, then quietly, his voice barely above her breath, he said, "I've been thinking about you every moment since you left. Can't eat, can't sleep, just waiting to see you again." Catherine's breath caught. "I thought maybe you regretted." "Never." His gray eyes softened. "But your father." Before he could finish, the office door slammed open. Edmund Thornton stood there, face flushed with anger, eyes blazing. "Get your hands off my daughter." The entire bank went silent. Catherine froze. Colton straightened but didn't move away. "Mr. Thornton," he began, his voice steady, "I came here to ask your permission to court your daughter properly." Quote, "Permission denied." Edmund snapped Catherine upstairs. "Now, no." Father Catherine's voice was quiet, but firm. "You need to listen." "I will not listen to this nonsense," he shouted. "You are my daughter, a Thornton. You'll not throw your life away for some wandering giant with no standing, no name." "I'm not throwing my life away." Catherine said, "I'm choosing it." Edmund's eyes widened at her defiance. His hands shook as he pointed at Colton. "You don't know what you're doing. This man will ruin you. He'll drag our family's name through the mud." "Sir," Colton said, his tone respectful but strong, "I understand your fear, but I mean no harm. I want to give your daughter a good life. I'd never shame her." Edmund laughed bitterly. "A good life on a half-broken ranch in a shack fit for horses." "Better a shack built on honesty," Catherine said, "than a mansion built on pride." The silence that followed was deafening. Edmund's anger faltered just for a heartbeat before roaring back. "If you walk out that door with him, you're no longer my daughter." Catherine's throat etched, but her voice stayed steady. "Then I'll walk anyway." She turned, but her mother's voice stopped her. "Wait." Margaret Thornton stood in the doorway of the bank, her face pale but calm. "Edmund, please," she said softly, "let them speak." "Margaret, don't." "I will," she said firmly, "because I remember what it felt like to be told who I could love." Her eyes found her husband's. "You forget, dear. My father said the same thing about you." The old banker went still. Catherine looked between them, hope flickering like a candle in a storm. Margaret crossed to her daughter, took her hand, and placed it gently into Colton's. "If you're going to stand against this town, you'll need strength, but love worth having is never easy." Catherine's voice shook. "Mother, are you saying?" "I'm saying follow your heart," Margaret said. Then she looked at her husband. "And you, Edmund, if you push her away now, you'll lose her forever." Edmund turned away, fists clenched, fighting a battle no one else could see. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock and the wind through the open door. Finally, he spoke. His voice was rough, tired. "You love him." "With everything I am," Catherine said, "and you'll stand by her." He asked Colton. Colton nodded once till my last breath. Quote, Edmund let out a long sigh, the fight draining from him. "Then you've got 1 month," he said finally. "Prove to me you can give her a good life." Show me you're more than just a story this town will whisper about. Colton extended his massive hand. I'll do just that, sir. The banker hesitated, then shook it. And just like that, the battle line between fear and love began to blur. A month passed in Red Creek. Each Sunday, Colton came to dinner, dressed in his cleanest shirt, shoulders tense, manners careful. Catherine's father watched him like a hawk, asking questions about cattle, fencing, and the price of feed. Catherine, seated across the table, could barely breathe for wanting to reach across and take his hand. By the third Sunday, even Edmund had begun to soften. Colton spoke with quiet confidence about his plans, how he was rebuilding the ranch, how he'd hired 2 local hands, how the land would thrive again come spring. That night after Colton left, Edmund stood at the parlor window for a long time. He's a stubborn man, he muttered, and honest. Reminds me of someone. Margaret smiled. You, he didn't argue. When the month ended, Colton returned to the bank, not as a customer this time, but as a man ready to change his life. Edmund met him at the door. Well, he said, you've proven me wrong. My daughter's happy. The ranch is prospering. I suppose I can't ask for more than that. He paused, then extended his hand again. Welcome to the family, Mr. Hayes. Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she threw her arms around her father. Thank you, she whispered. You won't regret this. I already do, he said, but his voice cracked with pride. A month later, the church bells of Red Creek rang louder than they had in years. The whole town gathered to see the wedding no one thought would happen. The banker's daughter and the giant cowboy. When Colton Hayes knelt to place a kiss on Catherine Thornton's hand, the crowd went silent, and when he lifted her veil and kissed her, slow, tender, reverent, the same people who had whispered before now cheered. Years later, folks in Red Creek still told their story. Not the scandal, not the size of him, not the rules they broke, but the love they built. A love that didn't care about reputation or appearances, a love that proved that sometimes the heart is wiser than all the world's expectations, and when the wind blew across the open plains, people swore you could still hear it, the quiet echo of a promise made in a small town bank between a girl who wanted to be seen and the giant who saw her